Okay, so where are we headed in these final two podcasts? I say two podcasts, maybe I'll make a third, but this one is going to be about the diatonic scale, and the next one is going to be how do you use the diatonic scale to make music easily. Oh, I hear you say, diatonic scale? Diatonic scale? That's far too complicated. Whatever's that? Well, diatonic scale simply means do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Going from do to the next do up is called a scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, do, do. That's a scale. And when you go up with those intervals, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, that's called a diatonic scale. And I'm going to explain in this podcast what those intervals are and what they mean and what the significance is for making music. And just so as you can understand better where this is all going, I'll tell you now that the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do scale is man-made. The gaps between those notes are to do with the frequencies of those notes. We talked about frequencies last time. Do you remember when a string vibrates, it vibrates a certain number of times per second? Now that's called the frequency. Well, each of those notes, do, re, mi, fa, etc., they all have a frequency. And the gaps between those frequencies is carefully planned. And so a diatonic scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, is not just random notes, it's notes that have been planned that way. Not everywhere in the world uses those notes, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. But we here in Western Europe do. Plenty of music is not based on do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, but so much is. And so once you understand about that scale and about what those gaps are, you will be able to make so much music. And you'll be able to make it naturally by understanding it. But if we're going to talk about gaps between notes, first we have to understand some of the words we use in music to describe this. Let's start off by talking about the names of the black notes. We've already seen that the names of the white notes are A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then A, B, C, D, E, F, G again, and so on. But what about the black notes? Black notes are the in-between notes. What are their names? Well, if you sit in front of a keyboard and you play the black note that comes right after A, you can hear that it's a little bit higher than A. Musically, we call that sharper. The note just above A is sharper than A. So you can call it A sharp. If you play the B note on a piano and you play that same black note that's just before it, the A sharp, it's a bit lower than B. We call that a bit flatter than B. So another name for A sharp is B flat. A sharp and B flat are the same note. So why not have a go and see if you can name all of the black notes? Start off by calling them something sharp. The one that's just above A is A sharp. What's the one just above C and the one just above D? Can you work out their names? So the names of the black notes, the one just above A is A sharp, the one just above C is C sharp, the next one D sharp, the next one F sharp, G sharp, and then A sharp again. If you want instead to think of them as being flatter than the note above, then from the top downwards, B flat, A flat, G flat, E flat, D flat. B flat is the note that's just a bit flatter than B. A flat is the note that's just a bit flatter than A, and so on. B flat, A sharp, the same note. E flat, D sharp, the same note, and so on. Okay, so now we know the names of the black notes, let's talk about the intervals. So how big is the jump from A to A sharp? Do you know the name for that? It's a semitone. A semitone is the smallest gap between any two notes. It's a jump from any note to the very next note. It doesn't have to be from a white note to a black note. It can be from a black note to a white note, or even when there's two white notes next to each other with no black note in between, then the gap between those two white notes is a semitone. Okay, you know what a semitone is now. What's the jump from A to B? It goes from A to A sharp is a semitone, from A sharp to B is another semitone. But there's a name for the jump from A to B. The answer is a tone. Two semitones make a tone. A tone is two semitones, so therefore it's the gap between two white notes if there's a black note in between. If there's no black note in between, then it can be from a white note to a black note. For instance, from B to C sharp, or from E to F sharp. So let's just double check that you're with me here. What's a semitone? What's a tone? A semitone is the smallest gap between any two notes, and a tone is two semitones. Right, we're now going to use those words to explore what we mean by a diatonic scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So you remember an octave. An octave, for instance, is from A to the next A up, or from B to the next B up, or from C to the next C up, or from do to the next do. From any one note to the eighth note above it. That's an octave. So have a look on a keyboard, or on this presentation, at the octave from A to the A above. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. But there aren't just those notes there, are there? There aren't just the white notes, there are the black notes in between. So in fact there are 12 semitones in an octave. Just have a look at those on A. Can you name them as you play them? A, A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp or E flat, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A. 12 semitones in an octave. Why are they arranged like that? In fact, why are there 8 white notes and 5 black notes and not just 13 white notes? Well, one reason is that it would be very hard to play a keyboard because you wouldn't know where you were if there were no black notes, and the A sharp and C sharp and D sharp and F sharp and G sharp, if they were all white, you wouldn't know where you were. But that's not the reason for this arrangement of 8 white and 5 black. Before I tell you why a keyboard is arranged in the way that it is, let me just point out that this is why you had to know about frequencies of notes, and this is why you had to know about tones and semitones. The next few minutes will help you understand what the diatonic scale, do, re, mi, etc., what the diatonic scale is all about. And what it's all about is that the gaps between do and re, between re and mi, etc., the gaps in that scale have a very carefully planned relationship. Let me explain this relationship using the scale of C. You remember that a scale is do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. For instance, the scale of C is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. I'm going to explain the relationship between the notes in a diatonic scale, do, re, mi, etc. I'm going to explain the relationship between do, re, mi using the scale of C. It's easy in C because it's all on the white notes, so it's easier to understand. So a semitone is the gap from a white note to the black note next to it, or the gap from a white note to the white note next to it if there's no black note in between. So from E to F is a semitone, from B to C is a semitone. So here's a challenge. Can you say what all the gaps are in the scale of C? The gap from C to D, the gap from D to E, and so on. Are they tones or semitones? Just have a look at a keyboard or pause the podcast and see if you can name them all. Did you manage it? Well, from C you go up a tone to D. D you go up a tone to E. Then a semitone to F, a tone to G, a tone to A, a tone to B, and a semitone to C. Tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. The gaps are all a tone, except for the gap from the third to the fourth note of the scale, and the gap from the seventh to eighth note of a scale. This is a very important moment in this series of podcasts. You remember that I'm trying to explain how the gaps between the notes in a diatonic scale, do, re, mi, etc., the gaps between those notes, how that helps you make music. So it's really important that you understand these next few slides. So would you mind just pausing the podcast once again whilst you name those gaps in the scale of C? Did you get them all right? Tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. They're all tones except for the third to the fourth and the seventh to the eighth. This arrangement, tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, that is the fundamental basis of a diatonic scale. Any scale that has those gaps is a diatonic scale. Any scale that has those gaps will sound like this: do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Do, tone to re, tone to mi, semitone to fa, tone to sol, tone to la, tone to ti, semitone to do. That is a diatonic scale. So now we know why we have 8 white notes and 5 black notes, not just 13 white notes. The answer is because the white notes from C to C form a diatonic scale with the gaps tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. And diatonic scales in this part of the world sound right to our ears. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And it's not just if you start on C, it's the same whichever note you start on the keyboard. If you start on G, you'll also go up using the same gaps. It was easier to explain using the scale of C because we just went up the white notes. But if you go up using those gaps in the scale of G, when you get to near the end, you have to come onto a black note, F sharp. So the scale of G has one sharp note in it, F sharp. If you start a diatonic scale on the note of D, then you'll find, using those gaps, that there will be 2 black notes, F sharp and C sharp. The scale of D has 2 sharps. The scale of A has 3 sharps. Try it out. Use those gaps and see if you can play the scale of A with a C sharp, an F sharp and a G sharp in it. Some scales, like for instance F, has a black note in that we conventionally call a flat. F, G, A. And the next note, you could call it A sharp, but we tend to call it B flat for complicated reasons. So the scale of F has one flat. You can even play a scale starting on a black note, for instance starting on B flat. If you go up tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone from a B flat, you'll find that the scale has two flats in it, the B flat itself and an E flat, and so on. Whichever note of the piano you start on, whether it's a white note or a black note, when you play do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, the gaps are always tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, whichever note you begin on. So why is this important? Well, it's important because those gaps between those notes are man-made. They have been designed in this part of the world so that the frequencies are related to each other. You remember frequency? The pitch of the note is the number of vibrations per second, and the frequency of do, re, mi, etc. Those frequencies are related to each other. Let me explain. Do you remember from the first podcast that every note has a frequency? That is, the number of vibrations happening per second. The very lowest A is 55. The A above it is double that, 110. The A above that is double, 220. The A above that is double again, 440. When you're playing the 440A on a string, then that string is vibrating 440 times per second. We also pointed out in the first podcast that when frequencies are related to each other, then they can make harmony. And so, finally, we get to the purpose of this podcast. In a diatonic scale, the fifth note above do is always, whatever the do is, 1.5 times the frequency of the do. For instance, the frequency of C is 262. The frequency of the fifth note above it, G, is 1.5 times that. And we've already said that the frequency of the C above is double. This is a very special relationship that sounds very harmonious in our ears. Furthermore, the third note also has a frequency carefully related to the first and the fifth and the eighth note of the scale. It does not matter which note you start on a keyboard. If you're playing a diatonic scale, the first, third, fifth and eighth notes will have frequencies that are carefully related to each other. And because they are mathematically related, they sound nice together. That is, they make harmony. Let me summarize. A diatonic scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, has gaps between the notes of tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. And these are specially crafted intervals between the notes in order that the diatonic scale can easily make what sounds like nice harmony. Just pause the podcast for a minute and just tell me, why does C sound nice with G? The answer is because G is exactly the right interval above C. It's exactly 1.5 times the frequency, and that makes it sound nice. Listen. To our ears in Western Europe, these mathematically related notes sound harmonious together. There are all sorts of harmonies throughout the world that are not mathematically related. But a huge number of pop songs have harmony sequences based on the relationship between the notes of a diatonic scale. Okay, you've now finished the first 2 podcasts, and you should understand about frequency, note, pitch. You should understand that the gaps are called tones and semitones. You should understand what an octave is and what a scale is. And you should be beginning to get the feeling that the mathematical relationship between the notes in a scale makes nice harmony. Finally, you should know what a diatonic scale is, and you should know that when you play the white notes on a keyboard, beginning on C, you're playing a diatonic scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. In the next podcast, I will explain how to put all this knowledge together to make music. Keep going.